Okay, good morning. We're here today, we're going to talk about poetry in two separate lessons. And what we're going to look at first today is how do you go about planning a poetry question? So you've got a 50-mark question, so you've got yourself about 50 minutes. And any question that's 50 marks or more in either paper should really have some kind of plan. But you've got to control it. I wouldn't go ahead without one, but you want to make sure you don't go beyond, let's say, 5 of those 50 minutes to get this plan up and running. And what students often will encounter is that their notes that they've done on a particular poet are far too in-depth to be translatable perfectly across into an exam question for a number of reasons. The main one being the question is quite narrow. They never ask you just generally go talk about Yeats or whoever. They want a specific focus. And so all your notes that you might have on poet X, you only need a part of them, a particular part you've been asked for. And so even if your knowledge of your notes is somehow photographic, you're going to need to peel away what you don't need on the day. So a plan is the best way to do that. It's the only way to do it really. So let's have a look at how we might go about doing that. So what I have on the board is a question about Eileen Quillinan. So I'm just going to read the question. I'm going to explain what's on the board, how it's being used. Now please keep in mind, when I'm doing this, I'm doing it slow to show you and explain as we go. But it is a 5-minute thing on the day. So even some of the writing you see here, first of all, it'll be written quicker. But secondly, I'd make extensive use of abbreviations. So, I'm lacking the killer instinct. The poem might just be the word kill or something. But this, for demonstration purpose, will be explained fully. So, this is the wording of the question. Ní Quillinan's demanding subject matter and formidable style can prove challenging. So it's your typical higher level Leaving Cert poetry question. It's just a sentence. You're asked on some level to agree or disagree with it, but to dig into what it's asking and to try and come up with an answer that addresses the specific wording of the question. So before I go look at this and what I'm doing here, I just want to point out, and it's probably hard to see there, but what I would do my plan on a full A4 page. So when I get into the exam hall and they say you can begin, I would immediately ask for another exam booklet. You're going to get to it anyway, but I want a place where I can plan and yet be writing and looking back at the plan rather than turning a page back and forward. And so what I have here, this is how I would divide the page that I was going to plan on. About 1/3 above, 2/3 below. I would just draw a line. And the way I think about it is what's above the line is a place where I can just jot down thoughts, ideas. I don't have to commit to anything. But I kind of do commit then to what goes below being the order in which I'll do things. So that's how I like to do it. But the main point there being whether you divide your page in two or not, that page should be in front of you while you're writing this question. So it should be a separate page. A plan that doesn't require you flicking back and forward, and also if you do that you're more likely to leave out parts of your plan, so you kind of shoot yourself in the foot there a little bit. So what you see here is what I imagine being the top part. Now I don't have all the space on my whiteboard, so I'm going to imagine this is my top half, and so this is where the more creative and messy side of planning out the question is, but it's really important, especially when you consider that the question is just a sentence. It's kind of vague. There are specific things it's asking you, but they're always open to interpretation. So here's where I'm going to kind of explicitly try and interpret it. Okay, so what I've done, and a lot of students will be familiar with this, is, okay, well, I'm going to pick out the specific phrases in the question. They'll come up in the marking scheme. Anyone who's had a look at them, you'll see that, examiners going around looking for, where did they mention demanding subject matter, etc. So, you build your plan around this to begin with. So I've underlined demanding subject matter, formidable style and challenging. Okay, fairly typical so far. What I like to do, and I find it more useful than I always think it's going to be, is I try and immediately try and find other words that mean the same thing. If nothing else, it'll stop me from repeating demanding subject matter again and again and again. And when that spills into the language category of your grades, and examiners get tired of the mechanical repetition of this. There's no need for it. And this only took me 30 seconds. I don't need to come up with 12 different words for it. It's just a handy little kind of list I can pick from when I realise, gosh, yeah, I've used the word demanding 3 times recently. I'm going to switch from it and pick a different word that I chose. So these are the 3 areas we're going to try and interpret when coming up with our answer. So the word demanding, I said, okay, well, serious, profound, affecting, striking, moving. I try to do the same for 2 and 3. So like formidable, powerful, intimidating, complex, unique, demanding, challenging, difficult, emotive. Okay, even if you only have 2, I just find it's very useful under time constraints and in an exam hall to have that done in this planning phase of your thinking about it before you go and execute. Okay, so that's sort of in my back pocket. I can use it extensively, barely touch on it, but it's there for me. So I'm still up here in this section, and this is the way I like to plan these days. So I would imagine most of you are familiar with the thought that when I read this, when I've highlighted the areas, I do want to try and organise my poems in some way. So it's not just this poem and then some other poem. It also helps your writing. It's easier to write about things that are grouped together under certain categories. And of course, the main way of doing this is to talk about themes. And it ensures then that themes are in your answer anyway. You can't let them slide because you put them into your plan, and you've arranged your plan in such a way that a natural theme gets discussed and the poems that are most relevant to that theme. Then maybe you move on to a second one. You're near the end of your answer then. You've guaranteed it's kind of hardwired in to what you're going to write. So this kind of looks like it's going to be a spider diagram, that kind of thing. I'm going to use it a little bit differently. And so I have 2 main themes I've identified. Now, as I read the question, of the 6 poems we did, 5 major ones came into mind. I have a 6th in mind if I want to use it, but these 5 are probably enough. No harm throwing the 6th one into my plan. You never know, I might look up at the end of the exam and go, I've got enough time to do that last poem, and it is in my plan. So you give yourself flexibility. What I'm going to do is choose 2 of Niquilinon's main themes. So I think on the right I'm going to put this one in, which is quests and journeys. Okay, so definitely it comes up in many places in Niquilinon's poems. Question journeys you'll find in the poem Following, for example, and in a few others. Now, how I'm going to use this that's slightly different from a spider diagram, and I just find it's quick and it visually suggests what goes where, is that poems that are highly relevant to this are going to go closer to the centre, and ones that are less relevant go further out. So I can see just by looking that, okay, these 2 poems I'm going to put in, they are going to be key to this. I mean, I'll do them first when I talk about question journeys. When I put in the second theme, I'll do the same on the other side. And it just gives me an order of priority in which to discuss them. And there's a practical reason for this as well, which is we talked about having time left over there, and I might get to do my 6th poem, but you could also run over in time, in which case you want to make sure you've done the poems that you felt were most suitable to the question and most suitable to the theme first. Get them out of the way, and then at least if you had to cut something off early, it's something that had less significance than those major poems did. Okay, we're back. So on the right hand side here, I've got question journeys, and I have these 3 poems, and I can tell straight away which ones I think are best suited to the theme and the question. Okay, so following Lucina Shinning and Street. I have my own reasons for these. I'll give you a little example here. I don't need to do all 6 of these out for you. You should be able to replicate this yourself, but I'll show you what I'm thinking and how I would finish this. And again, keep in mind, this will be done at lightning speed. If I had time, I might jot down the beginnings of some of the key quotes I can remember that are relevant to the question. I might not have time, and I might not even need to. On the day when you go into the exam hall, you see Niquillanon, let's say. You've got 6 poets' poems floating around in your head, and it's very difficult to keep all that there. But as soon as you read the question, and I would recommend doing that, at least reading it and making the decision, maybe even doing the plan first, of poetry, I mean. But once you see, let's say Niquillanon, and she's who you were hoping was there, and more than that, the question also suits, and you're like, yeah, I can do that. It frees up all those other quotes and images and things you're trying to keep in your mind about the other 5 poets. They will just, the pressure from that will be released immediately. So you may not need to write down quotes out of fear of forgetting them, because your mind will come under a lot less pressure, which sounds unusual for what you can expect in the exam hall during the Leaving Cert, but it is a reality. So here's what I have. I have the following first. The reason being demanding, formidable, challenging. Okay, well, I mean, formidable style is an opinion, but it is that part of a poetry question that asks you to focus on the way they write. Okay, so what I might say for Niquillanon here is that, particularly in the 2nd stanza, where the girl goes into the bog, it's very symbolic and it implies a lot. And in fact, the rest of the poem from then on is based a lot on implication, symbolism, and a lot of the reader's interpretations come into it. So for following, I might say that. I might just say implied, reader. Now, for you on the day, you write in what you know what you mean when you write it in. I can explain this, but I have there. You won't need to, so it's a lot quicker. Okay, demanding subject matter. Okay, in my opinion, the subject matter here is kind of becoming her own person, or deciding to be a poet, or perhaps stepping out of her father's shadow. I think that's really what the poem is about here. That's what the quest and journey, the ultimate end goal of it is here. So, demanding subject matter. What it looked like in my plan is just this, stepping out. That's enough to remind me what I want to say. And the main focus of what I'm going to say, in this case, the main focus of the quest and journey is to step out of her father's shadow. The formidable style, it uses a lot of implied things, symbolism, and it's up to the reader. And challenging. Okay. What I've said here is that I think the great challenge in this poem is to have the confidence of your own interpretation of it. And so that's the challenge here. With that, I'm definitely going to hit all 3 things the question's asked. And I know from the way I've put it closer to here that following is going to be one of my major poems. Now, on the day, you'll obviously be quite practical about this. You might think, yeah, I think following is the major poem here. However, I'm finding it difficult to remember the quotes from it, or it was a poem I was weaker on. In which case, I push it down the list, push one up closer, and just explain and make it central. Make sure that these 3 things the question's asking are as strong as they are in my plan here for following. Okay? For Lucina Shinning, demanding subject matter, I might say for that is that it's autobiographical. This recounts the night that Euphony sort of ran away when her father was desperately ill, and how she got the bravery to come back. So demanding subject matter, no problem, right? Autobiographical, highly personal, and very honest. Formidable style. Yeah, the Sinishing is interesting like that. She does kind of what she does in follow here as well. After the initial setup, things get very suggestive and implied. And when she's describing the mosaic beasts on the chapel floor, things get kind of biblical. She talks about plagues, again, very biblical. A lot of implied meaning there as well. Formidable, as the question asks. Challenging, no problem with this initiating. That particular section is quite challenging. And don't be afraid to put in your personal opinion on this. You know, you could say, I found it challenging, I found it jarring compared to the rest of it. You know, if you want to criticize the poem, well, a question that's asking you to say that things were challenging is almost asking you to criticize the poem. Don't be afraid to do it. It doesn't matter if you do or not, but put in your own point of view where possible. Okay, and as street, I have down here quests and journeys. You have in it the man trying to work out where he stands with this powerful woman in the poem. So this for me works nice. It's quick. It's very, very, very clear. You get massive clarity on what you're asked, what you're being asked, how you're going to express it, how you're going to organise your answer, and within each poem, where it belongs in terms of themes. And I've hit the three things the poem is asking. So hopefully you can see there why, if you could do this quickly, it would be very, very useful under exam conditions. So we'll do one more, and we'll have a look at elegy and remembrance, one of Euphony's other main themes. The idea here of how people are remembered, how we respect their memories, maybe how we view ourselves when we are just a memory. So it's deep stuff. So I have the three poems, similar to here. Order of importance to the question. I decided the bend in the road belongs closest, will be the major element. Unlacking the killer instinct, very important too, I think, but I'm going to make the bend in the road my main focus. And then finally, deaths and engines. I think it's a strong one. It's handy in a way because there's just a small section of it where she specifically talks about being remembered, how we're remembered. So if you can remember that image, it's a really, really quick bite-sized one, a time-saving one. And keep in mind that that's the idea of doing this. Street and engines, both would fit very, very well if you only had a small amount of time left. You could still do a good paragraph using a strong image from it, since they both have an image central to this question. So if I look at the bend in the road, I'll do the same. 1, 2, 3. Demanding subject matter. Yeah, mortality. Mortality and family. In the poem, a boy is young, then he becomes a man, and then he becomes an old man, and she talks about how you remember them as they pass away, or how you prepare to remember them. That is demanding subject matter. You know, I don't think there's any question about that. I wouldn't have any difficulty writing about it as being demanding. Formidable style. It's an interesting one here. Formidable style, in a way, it's very typical of her. It's less mysterious, I think, than Following and Street and some other poems. Much clearer in some ways. But it does have some very open to interpretation images. So the one that comes to mind is the tree like a cat's tail in the opening stanza. So I would focus on this, you know, because it's a childhood memory that they laugh about when they get older, about the boy getting car sick. But, you know, the cat's tail has a certain menace to it. It indicates mood. So when I talk about formidable style here, I think I would kick off with that one. That might be enough. You know, I may want to talk about the memories that are packed, fragile, but I don't find that particularly challenging. But remember, it's open to particularly formidable. I mean, I don't find it particularly formidable, but formidable again could mean I just think it's excellent. So it's up to you. Formidable style, I'll go with here. Cat's tail. I've also put in the option there of talking about the one cloud in the sky that she talks about. And again, on the day, some of this will be limited by what's clearly coming through, what you're clearly remembering. So be flexible. You know, I'd love to remember that great image that fits, but I'm drawing a blank. So I'm going to use the cat's tail instead. Okay, and then challenging. Yeah, it's a good opportunity in this poem to talk about how, you know, it's not pleasant to think about family members growing old and dying. Rather, you could say that. You could say, I found it challenging because it challenged me to treasure even the silly memories that I have that involve my family. So you can see that's quite flexible too, if you're flexible enough in the way you look at it. So challenging, I'm going to go with so what I put in for 3 is family members getting old, dying. I found that challenging. So I hope when you're looking at this you think, okay, well, and you should be looking at it this way. Yeah, I like this, I wouldn't do that, but I would do this. Yeah, you should be able to pick and choose yourself, and you should know yourself, I wouldn't get that done in 5 minutes, or I would if I left this part out, or that part out. But I think with this done, and that's in your top third of the page, you may not even need to go below that. That may be all the structure you need, in which case your plan could work nicely in 5 minutes. Some people prefer to do things very rough up here, and below their solid structure beneath it, if they're going to use that split in the page. Just make sure that, like I said, a plan should be on an A4 page, but my advice would be to have a part of that A4 page, which once all your thinking and planning is done, this is my instructions to myself. Okay, I shouldn't be looking back up at the squiggly, messy part. It should be this area in this direction. For these reasons is the way I'm going to answer the question. And then when you've got planning way of thinking in the planning phase out of the way, it's just about writing then. You're freeing yourself up to not have to go back and rethink, reorganize or replan anything. And that's the real strength of it, because once you start the writing, it will just flow. Okay? So, thank you very much. Okay, so we've looked at how you might plan a poetry answer in the Leaving Cert. So another question students often ask is, okay, I've got my planning done. What does my discussion of the poem look like? What does it sound like? What's it like to read? What am I supposed to do? And what's a good answer? So we're going to use as an example here, essentially class notes on a poem by Adrian Rich. What I'm going to suggest to do at certain points during this is, if you're following along and you want to actually practice it, is that you might pause when I ask you to, and then try the thing I've asked you to do, and then look at how I did and compare them. Okay, so it'll be an interesting way to see, well, just how close am I to this? What do I need to do? What am I not doing? What am I already doing? Fine, then I don't need to change at all. So if you want to do that, at a few points I would suggest, pause here, give that a shot. Okay, so brief introduction. Adrian Rich, a woman very much interested in, I suppose, feminism, was a feminist before really it was a thing. She was married to a guy, had a number of children, realised later in life that she was actually a lesbian, and was not at a time in America where that was acceptable. So a lot of hidden life going on with her. So she has a lot of compassion for women who are subjugated and crushed by society. Keeping in mind that society, when she was living, was far more restricted for women. I guess for everyone, but her focus here is women. Especially from her point of view, it was unfair, unjustified, and it struck her, I suppose, personally. Her poetry is very subtle, very beautifully crafted. She doesn't often need to say a lot, if you know what I mean. She doesn't need to write a lot to say a lot. And an excellent example is this poem here, Aunt Jennifer's Tigers. Quite a famous poem. I'm sure some of you have already studied it. So I'm going to read it to you. I'm going to have a quick chat then afterwards about the opening paragraph, what its job is. Just keep in mind before I do, that kind of discussion there about Rich, I think it's important for students to be able to talk about the poets they're studying and understand them as people. Because to me it makes it so much easier to write about them. They're not strange creatures, poets, they're people who, there are things that play on their minds, things that they often try and find the answers to, just like us, and there's things that are hard to resolve in our lives. These are often the things that they talk about and write about. So if you can understand where they come from, you can keep returning to that in your answer. You know, here we see Rich's point of view as a woman who kind of had to hide her identity. You know, you see Yeats, for example. He's very interested in Ireland's view of itself and Ireland's future, but he's also very egotistical. He's very interested in himself, likes talking about himself, and is very interested in how other people see him. I just find being able to think about them that way and bring that into any discussion of them, it just makes the writing more pleasant, more natural feeling, and easier in many ways. Okay, let's have a look at the poem. Aunt Jennifer's tigers prance across a screen, bright topaz denizens of a world of green. They do not fear the men beneath the tree, they pace in sleek chivalric certainty. Aunt Jennifer's fingers fluttering through her wool find even the ivory needle hard to pull. The massive weight of Uncle's wedding band sits heavily upon Aunt Jennifer's hand. When Aunt is dead, her terrified hands will lie still ringed with ordeals she was mastered by. The tigers in the panel that she made will go on prancing, proud and unafraid. Okay, 3 stanzas, beautifully written, especially when you look into the sort of internal rhyme, assonance, contrast, cacophony. Alright, let's have a look at the introduction. You'll notice in my introduction here, it's short. It should be. In this poem, Rich depicts her Aunt Jennifer and the restrictions her life and marriage have placed upon her. She is a woman who has suffered much and has no outlet for her own voice. As a result, her art, in the form of the embroidered tigers on a screen she made, reveals the hidden desire she had for something more for herself. As such, it is a sad and angry poem, delivered in a subtle and delicate manner. So I have here in red is my commentary on my writing here. So this is as long as an introduction to a poem should be in the Leaving Cert. You need to get on to the analysis, but students often take that to an extreme. I understand why. They pare it right down. You know, here she talks about her aunt who had a difficult marriage. You know, you can say this without compromising anything you're going to say down here and without lingering for too long. I think the easiest way to focus, and probably the clearest, best way to focus in your introduction is what's it about and what's the feelings expressed. So I think tone comes across quite naturally in an introduction without committing you to doing anything really. So I'm going to show you now how I would talk about the first stanza. As I said, I'll try and give you opportunities if you want to try and do it as an exercise to pause and do something similar yourself. And then I'm going to show you after this section here what it would look like actually on the page. So with all the notes and extra stuff taken out, this is what a paragraph might look like if you were doing it in the exam. Okay, so the poem opens with a description of the tigers. They are powerful, effortless predators. And this is the section we're basing it on. Aunt Jennifer's tigers prance across the screen, bright topaz denizens of a world of green. They do not fear the men beneath the tree. They pace in sleek chivalric certainty. So each line of the opening stanza has a sense of internal harmony to the sounds. That's called euphony. The first line uses sibilants extensively. conveying how all the tigers share this overall sense of power and effortless energy. So this is the S sound, prance across screen, tigers, Jennifers. The word prance shows how this power is playful. It's not really requiring any effort from the big cats. So let's have a look at what I'm saying here. The comment I made about the sibilants there, it isn't necessarily definitive, meaning it's not wrong if you don't say it. Rather, it's an attempt to incorporate my identification of this technique into a comment on perhaps why it was used. In this case, to show that tigers share something in common by sharing a particular sound when describing them. And this is a question I'm often asked. Most students get how to comment on metaphors and similes. But how do I say like the reason for the assonance or the reason for the sibilants? So just an example there of how it can be done. Often it's to connect things to other things or to focus on a particular moment in a poem. The second line describes them as bright topaz denizens as they seem to burst off the screen, which is a world of green. So you can probably see straight away there that this is contrast. The tiger's striking contrast with their environment shows their fearlessness. That's what I'm saying. They're not afraid to stand out. So I've said it, now I'm explaining it. This is then reinforced as the stanza continues. We are introduced to the men beneath the tree. One could assume they are hunters, especially since Rich points out that the tigers do not fear them, which is portrayed as being unusual. Yeah, so maybe they're hunters. Definitely wild animals afraid of humans, these ones are not. Contrast. So here I identified the contrast between the tigers and their environment. Seeing the line about not being afraid of the men coming, I realised the contrast was being used to lead us to that part of the stanza. Okay. Now we get to talking about assonance in more depth. So the assonance of the long E sound here continues the harmony from the start of the stanza and is an audible counter to the visual contrast of the line above. So you've got harmony and contrast, layered. The speaker seems to feel the admiration her aunt had for the animals here. We've seen them prance, unworried by the men, and now, moving to the last line, they pace. The tiger's sleek chivalric certainty impresses the reader, and we assume her aunt too. We're reminded here that her aunt could have portrayed the animals wherever she wanted, so the effect must be, or is deliberate. Rich uses cacophony at the ends of the stanza here, however. The sharp C, K and T sounds really stand out for the harmonious sounds used up to now. So while the tigers seem as powerful as ever here, there is something coming, and indeed we are being set up for the second stanza's change in tone. Alright, so what am I doing here? So finally I wanted to focus more on the tone, meaning the emotions expressed, and suggest the theme that was coming. I haven't really mentioned it, so I'm getting to it now. The theme here is primarily the subjugation of women by society or by men. So I remembered that the tigers were a work of art by Aunt Jennifer, and that Rich, at this point, is only really pointing out how beautiful a creation the tapestry is. But of course, the cacophony at the end, which usually signifies something wrong or something disruptive, something dangerous maybe, is the perfect lead-in to the second stanza. So I commented on both Jennifer's and Rich's tone here. So the tone of the person, the feelings expressed maybe by the person, Jennifer in this case, you know, that she admires strength, freedom, and freedom from fear, and then Rich admiring what she's done. It's all going to change in the second stanza. I know this. Students would know this. They've studied the poem. So it's a good lead-in. So underneath now I'm going to show you what, if I took out all the notes and the bits where I put the full stanza there, what it would look like on the screen. So the final version looks like that. That's a lot. You know, you turn that into an A4 page, it's the majority of an A4 page, I would imagine, handwritten. And so there's a problem there too. This is great for notes, but can you do this in the exam hall? Would you need to? Well, you might want to for certain parts of a poem. And that would be enough then. You don't have the time to go further. But we'll have a look at the end about how you might trim it down. Okay. So, what I might get you to do now is have a read of this stanza, and if you're going to do this yourself, try and do something similar to what I did now. Keep in mind the structure that I make a quick comment and then I go into some depth after I've used quotations. Anytime I use a quote, it gets a comment. It gets some kind of analysis, some kind of breakdown. So, if you want to do that, have a look at this. Try and break it down in some ways here. Keep in mind tone, theme, techniques as you're discussing it. So, if that's what you're doing, pause it now and come back in a second. We'll have a look at what else was done. Okay, so here's my version of stanza 2, what I would say. So here's your point, your quote is here, or your quote's used, and comment mingled together. The point is always quite brief. We learn about Aunt Jennifer's life in this stanza. She is a broken and defeated person. So if I had to sum it up in 1 or 2 sentences, I think that's pretty accurate. Focusing on these 2 lines, Aunt Jennifer's fingers fluttering through her wool, find even the ivory needle hard to pull. So it is clear that she's not well. For someone who is able to embroider and knit well, her hands are shaky. The poet's use here of the same harmonic language as the start of the first stanza now becomes somewhat ironic. The alliteration and in particular the use of assonance in the words Jennifer's fingers flutter her, that's that sound. The repeated sound that continues well into the second line, as well as the E sound of even, ivory, the needle, would in the first stanza have been associated with the effortless power of the tiger. So that's what assonance was used for at the start of the poem. She's deliberately turning it on its head here. Here, though, it is used when describing frailty. She can barely pull the needle through the wool, and it's not from lack of trying, as her knitting seems to be of importance to her. Okay. The effort Rich goes to when using all these sound effects here can be seen as evidence that it's something she couldn't help but notice every time she met her aunt, and suggests she feels pity at the state she's in. Reminding myself, to be explicit, what feelings are being expressed here? Yes, I think it's pity. There's certainly some anger on the way, but I think those 2 lines, this is someone to be pitied. The massive weight of Uncle's wedding band sits heavily upon Aunt Jennifer's hand. By way of explanation for this situation that Jennifer's in, the stanza moves on to strongly imply her marriage was not a good one. As is often the case in Rich's poetry, the subjugation of women, so my theme is now explicitly here, is a central theme underlying much of her work. The wedding ring of the unnamed uncle is massive, and now the frailty of Jennifer is strongly contrasted with it. That's deliberate. She's frail, can barely move the knitting needle, and then uncle's ring, the wedding to him, is a weight that's crushing her. She points out it sits heavily upon Aunt Jennifer's hand, with heavy implication following once more, as it is her aunt's hands she uses as evidence of trauma above. Her hands shake, her hands are weak, and this weight is on them. Now, this is underlined here for this explanation. We can read a lot into this clearly. Firstly, Rich seems to blame the marriage and her uncle for Jennifer's condition. By linking it to the hands specifically, we are free to connect the art of her tigers with perhaps a resistance against her expressing herself artistically from her uncle. So a bit awkwardly phrased there, but the idea that perhaps he has stopped her from pursuing other artistic forms other than this knitting, which she can't do very well in the importance of her hands. Has she been told or forced to limit herself only to this art form? Or has she been bullied or beaten into submission? Now the brave, free tigers of the first stanza, they seem far more aspirational or even rebellious in context. And this here meaning that it's like she would aspire to be as brave and free and chivalric and prancing as they are, but she's not. Of course, if this is the case, it is a concealed rebellion, as Jennifer is no less frightened or defeated after knitting them. I feel Rich's anger in these 4 lines, and also a sense of powerlessness to intervene. Theme and tone. Here I've tried to put some more of my own personal response as well into the writing, as well as being explicit about referring to a theme and Rich's tone shift from stanza 1. Now, when talking about tone, it's my favourite thing to discuss. I think it's the most natural way to get into discussing a poem that doesn't feel mechanical, exam-like. Keep in mind where tone changes. It's often a very important part of a poem. You know, if it starts off all carefree and then changes, you know something important is going on here. If you take, for example, the Quillanon's Bend in the Road, the child getting car sick, it's kind of light. By the end, the same child is an old man, and there's a heaviness to it. Okay. So, if you want to try, if you want to pause the video, try your look at the last stanza. We've seen 1, moved on to 2 as a progression, and very much a contrast from stanza 1. Then we have stanza 3. This stanza is about Aunt Jennifer's future as Rich saw it, what was going to happen to her. Okay, so if that's what you're going to do, pause it now. Let's have a look at what was written. So, Rich moves on to the future for her aunt in the final stanza, imagining how she will appear when she is dead. Rich comments that her terrified hands will lie still ringed with ordeals she was mastered by. We can see here that she, in a way, thinks her aunt will manage to escape this existence, something many of the speakers of her poems do successfully manage to do. Will not, I should have said there, apologies. Rich is quite explicit here now, mostly abandoning the subtle implied traumas of the previous stanza. Her aunt was indeed terrified, and the phrase ringed with ordeals is very revealing. At first it is an obvious link to the wedding ring and her marriage, and the emotion that caused her to end up like this is now revealed as nothing less than terror. You know, Rich isn't willing to imply so much here, it's like she was terrified in her daily life. But ringed also means surrounded by, and the sense here is that she was trapped and had no escape. Now that's reinforced by what we saw in the previous stanza. We remember the tigers of the first stanza, who, while surrounded by the men, did not fear them in the slightest. The contrast between them and her is powerful and is the focus of the last 2 lines. So she makes that contrast explicit. You have tigers, you have Jennifer, and in the last stanza, both of them together, to see how different they are from each other. While Jennifer will not survive, or live a happy life, or escape in triumph in the end, her art will remain. They are depicted once more as prancing, proud, and unafraid. And Rich is juxtaposing this with Jennifer herself one last time. They are seen as opposites to her aunt. So we are left with an image of a woman who was restricted, humiliated, and terrified. But Rich clearly ends the poem feeling deep sadness, limited only by the knowledge that the tigers in the stream are a reminder of what her aunt really wanted, and they could never be touched by any of the things she suffered. It isn't much, but Rich seems to feel they represent her aunt far greater than her actual life ever did. As a poet, we can assume this reminds Rich of the importance of her own art. A little bit of my personal reflection there, personal input. A nice place to put it is at the end of a paragraph. We're analysing something. So that's what I did there. So as you can see, those 3 huge paragraphs together, you couldn't do that in an exam question. That would be half your question, half your time, probably. So how do we turn notes like this into an answer? Well, it's all down to the phrasing of the question. You know, the question might focus on a theme like subjugation of women. You need to pare down. You're going to be limited as well by what you remember on the day, unless you've got like a photographic memory. So it's about taking the big version and scaling it down into something that fits. And I bet if I gave you those 3 and asked you to talk about that theme, you could already start picking things off. Well, what I might do is I might mention the tigers in the first stanza, but I don't have to quote it. You know, the subjugation of women, we see that in stanza 2 and 3, so there's one stanza you don't have to quote from. You should reference it because you need the context that the tigers are so brave before we see Jennifer, but that could be done in one sentence. So a little quick guide I have down here. So let's say it was a question on that theme. And keep in mind, it might not be phrased, probably won't be phrased the exact way it is in your poetry book. Your poetry book might have it down as, mine actually says, subjugation of women, but it could say female oppression or control of women or abuse or inequality. You know, that is a question that's opening the door for that theme you have prepared for. So as I've said here, if a question comes up, you choose the images that suit best, if you were doing Aunt Jennifer's Tigers, and that you can recall best too, you know. What can I manage to write about accurately on the day? You introduce any context needed. So example, as I said, there's no need to quote the description of the tiger, but they're important as context for stanza 2 and 3, which would probably be the main focus of your question. So mention them and why they're important. You write out the paragraphs using PQC or equivalent format. You're dealing with theme, tone and techniques, as I've tried to do in all of those there. And as I said, if you're stuck, I think tone is a good place to start. You know, how do people feel about it? What feelings are expressed by the poet? What feelings is Jennifer going through at different points? So you would actually make a hybrid paragraph, you know, or two, but you don't want to let it spill over. Now, if this poem is a major part of your answer, okay, it could go a little bit over one page, as long as you know that as you get closer to the end of your answer, the poems coming near the end will be scaled back in terms of how much writing is involved, which is actually quite natural of a way to write an answer when writing a poetry. In which case, yeah, okay, I've got the freedom to do a little bit more. If Aunt Jennifer and maybe one other or two other rich poems are absolutely essential to this answer, then they could take up, I don't know, 4 pages. The other two could take up 2, introduction, conclusion. Again, it depends on handwriting size and all that. I don't like to give page requirements. You've got 50 minutes, so you need to make your best judgment call on that. Okay, so I hope that's been helpful. Hopefully there'll be a few more follow-up videos, not on poetry next time. In the meantime, take care and good luck to you all.